A crisp envelope sits in Raymond Cooper's mailbox, marked with urgent HOA violation, $10,000 fine. The wind carried the faint scent of wood smoke and maple, rustling through yards strewn with yellow leaves and plastic pumpkins that hadn't been lit since last Halloween. Ethan Cooper adjusted the collar of his flannel as he stepped onto the gravel path in front of his father's home, Moose shuffling loyally behind him with the slow gait of a dog who'd already chased all the squirrels worth chasing. It had been 3 days since he'd come back to Fallfield Springs, and already the town felt quieter than he remembered, almost too quiet. When he pulled the mailbox door open, the envelope was right on top, clean and firm, standing out against coupons and folded circulars. No return address, just a bold red stamp and an all-caps title, Urgent HOA Violation, $10,000 fine. His eyebrows drew together. Moose sniffed the post like it might be bacon. Raymond sat on the porch swing, one leg crossed over the other, newspaper in his lap, steam rising from a chipped mug that read retired but still watching. Ethan climbed the steps, held out the letter. "You expecting a fine?" Raymond took it, adjusted his readers, and studied it for 3 full seconds before setting it on the table beside him. "Nope. That's it. Coffee first. Outrage later." He took a sip and gestured toward the front door. "Fridge has bacon. 2 strips. You cook it, I'll explain the HOA that doesn't exist." Ethan didn't move. "Wait, this is fake." "Oh, it's real enough for Cheryl," Raymond said. "But legal?" "Not even close." Cheryl Knight, the new woman across the street with a 2-car garage and an arsenal of clipboards, had introduced herself with the line, "I'll be keeping an eye on things around here." That had been 2 weeks ago, before Ethan arrived. Since then, she'd posted signs about community order, walked her Yorkie on a retractable leash longer than some driveways, and now, apparently, started issuing financial penalties. Ethan followed his dad's lead into the house, cooked the bacon, and sat at the kitchen table while Raymond cracked an egg into a pan. The smell of breakfast and quiet resolve filled the room. "So," Ethan asked, "do we pay it?" Raymond flipped the egg, slow and precise. "Not a penny." Later that morning, they took Moose on his usual walk down Maple Lane. The street felt like a Norman Rockwell painting with a bureaucratic smudge, jack-o'-lanterns deflated on stoops, porch swings creaked in rhythm with the breeze, and Cheryl stood in leggings and a fitted blazer, taping notices to every mailbox she could reach. Ethan paused. "She's doing it to everyone." "She's thorough," Raymond said. One neighbor, Mrs. Green, stepped out in her house slippers, blinking at the sheet in her hand. "Can she do this?" she asked aloud, but Cheryl was already moving to the next box, humming softly. At Betty's diner, the conversation turned from football to fines in under a minute. Ethan took a booth near the window, Raymond nodding toward the counter where Betty was serving up her second round of grits. She caught Raymond's eye, then Ethan's, and came over with a pot of coffee. "You hear about Cheryl?" she asked, pouring without waiting for an answer. "She fined my dad 10 grand, Ethan said. Betty whistled. "She handed Mrs. Eloise a warning this morning. For her wind chimes. Said they were sonically disruptive to community cohesion." Raymond stirred a sugar packet into his cup. "Cheryl's not lacking creativity. She put up a list, too," Betty said. "On the community board. Guidelines or something." Ethan finished his coffee in 2 gulps. On the way out, they passed the board near the door. A laminated sheet fluttered slightly at the bottom corner, Fallfield Springs HOA Guidelines, Community Harmony Edition, in Comic Sans, complete with a faded emblem that looked suspiciously like the sheriff's old seal. The guidelines included lawn stripe orientation, mailbox angles, even suggested hours for respectful TV volume. "She wrote this on a home printer," Ethan muttered. Raymond tilted his head. "Color ink's expensive these days." "She's committed." They took a copy and spent the afternoon on the porch, comparing the new bylaws to the actual county statutes Raymond still had filed in his den. Moose snored under the swing. At one point, Raymond chuckled and said, "This clause here. About flowerpot uniformity. It's lifted straight from a gardening blog." That evening, Ethan returned to the diner alone. The booths were quieter, the talk more cautious. Cheryl was seated at the counter, sipping herbal tea with a lemon wedge floating in it. When she spotted him, she rose. "You're Ethan," she said. "Raymond's son." He nodded once. She stepped closer, eyes sharp. "Noncompliance starts with people like your father." Half the room turned to listen. Ethan didn't answer. He just left, the bell above the door ringing twice behind him. Back home, the porch light cast long shadows across the steps. Moose lifted his head as Ethan approached the front door, tail wagging once. A new envelope lay tucked between the doorframe and the storm door. Ethan picked it up, flipped it over, and read the bold red ink, "Failure to pay will result in escalation." A new camera has been installed, perched on Cheryl's mailbox, pointed directly at the Coopers' front yard. It was subtle enough that Ethan didn't notice it at first. The morning light was casting long shadows across Maple Lane, and Moose was dragging his paws near the flower beds, more interested in a moth than the comings and goings of neighbors. But there it was, a square black lens, fixed to the top of Cheryl's mailbox post with a clean loop of duct tape, swiveling just slightly as if taking stock of who dared to smile wrong. "Dad," Ethan said, halting halfway up the walk. "She's got a camera aimed right at us." Raymond didn't glance up from his rake. "Of course she does." Ethan moved closer, squinting. The camera's tiny red light blinked every few seconds. Below it, a laminated sign flapped in the breeze, installed under Public Safety Clause 4.7.1, Fallfield Springs HOA. Raymond leaned the rake against the porch and took out his phone. A quiet click marked the photo. Ethan exhaled. "We're being watched like we're smuggling fireworks." "Could be worse," Raymond said. "Could be fireworks season." That afternoon, Cheryl's pearl-white SUV circled the block twice. The magnetic decals on either door now read HOA Chairwoman, Authorized Compliance Vehicle. Ethan stood at the porch rail, coffee mug in hand, as she pulled into her driveway across the street. She stepped out wearing mirrored sunglasses and a blazer with a gold pin that resembled a sheriff's star from a toy set. She caught his eye. "You'll be receiving updated guidelines soon," she said. "More envelopes?" Ethan asked. "QR-based," she replied curtly, tapping her phone. "We're going digital for efficiency. Streamlining compliance." Later that evening, small laminated flyers appeared on every porch. They featured a QR code, Cheryl's signature, and the title, Tech Modernization HOA Fund, Voluntary Donation Requested. The suggested amount, $75. The fine print? Voluntary in name, expected in spirit. Raymond added the flyer to his growing stack of HOA artifacts, each one tucked into plastic sleeves and stored in a ring binder beside his recliner. He didn't speak much, but he photographed everything, flyers, signs, even the print quality. The next morning, Ethan found Cheryl planting wooden stakes at the edge of several front lawns. Small red signs dangled from them, Violation Zone, Non-Compliant Properties Under Review. Mrs. Eloise Ramsey stood in her doorway in a pink robe, her tabby cat curling around her ankles. "I received a notice," she whispered as Ethan walked by, "for my cat. For meowing too loudly." "She fined you for that?" No. "Just a warning," Eloise replied. "But it said further disruption may lead to community disharmony." Her voice dropped. "She used the word disharmony, Ethan. About Tinkerbell." At Betty's Diner, the chalkboard by the counter had been altered overnight. Where it once listed specials, it now read, HOA Soup of the Day, served with side-eye. Betty didn't mention it, but her wink when she poured coffee spoke volumes. Deputy Glenn strolled in shortly after and took the seat next to Raymond at the counter. "You seen the cameras?" Ethan asked him casually. Glenn chuckled. "The one on the mailbox? Subtle as a spotlight. Legal?" Glenn hesitated. "Technically, yes. But when you aim it across someone's property line, well, it enters a gray area." Raymond stirred his coffee. Glenn leaned closer. "Off the record, She pulled this same stunt in Cottonville 4 years ago. Same decals, same QR codes. They shut it down fast. But not before she racked up a few hundred in donations. He sipped from his mug. Folks there still call her Clipboard Cheryl. That afternoon, the mail arrived. Ethan brought the pile inside and sorted through catalogs, bills, and one stiff envelope addressed to "Resident, immediate attention required." Inside was a printed notice, officially worded and sealed in plastic. Community inspection scheduled. Non-attendance equals admission of guilt. Ethan passed it to Raymond without a word. His father scanned it, eyes narrowing only slightly before he rose from his chair, crossed the living room, and opened the bottom drawer of an old metal filing cabinet. From within, he pulled a thick folder marked in black Sharpie, "Incident Records, Cheryl Knight, Cottonville." He held it in his palm for a moment, then opened to the first tab. Ethan discovers a faded photo of his father and a tall, imposing man standing before a courthouse, smiling. The picture had slipped halfway out of an old manila envelope, yellowed at the corners, tucked in the back of the bookshelf. Ethan found it by accident while looking for a pencil. The two men in the photo stood side by side, hands clasped behind their backs, both wearing suits with broad ties, their expressions easy but proud. One was Raymond, younger, leaner, mustache darker. The other was someone Ethan didn't recognize, a tall man with a square jaw and a stare that could quiet a room. He brought it out to the porch where his father sat beside a gurgling stovetop percolator, steam curling into the crisp air. "Who's this?" Ethan asked, holding up the photo. Raymond didn't look surprised. He took a sip from his mug and squinted. "Just a friend from long ago." Ethan waited. Raymond didn't elaborate. The percolator hissed, and a crow squawked from the neighbor's roofline. Ethan dropped into the chair next to him. "The courthouse in the background says Franklin County." "Good eye. You don't always need a badge to uphold justice," Raymond once said while sorting his fishing tackle. The line echoed now in Ethan's head. At Betty's that afternoon, the diner buzzed with new murmurs. Mr. Shaw, stooped and soft-spoken, muttered over a BLT that Cheryl had left a warning on his door because his American flag leaned too far left. Said it violated aesthetic standards, he grumbled. Betty refilled Ethan's mug. She docked Ramos for having a rusty hose reel. Called it visual decay. "And he fixed it?" Ethan asked. "Painted it gold." Laughter rippled across the counter. But when Cheryl passed by the window, clipboard in hand and an official-looking ID badge bouncing from a lanyard, the noise hushed just slightly. Her presence changed the air now, like ozone before a storm. That evening, Ethan rifled through the drawer where Raymond kept keys, string, and old receipts. At the very back was a black flash drive labeled in fine marker, "Boondocks." He turned it over in his fingers. Underneath lay a small card, worn but still legible, "In case of HOA emergency, Franklin Boone, County Judge." A number was scribbled in neat script. Ethan stared at it for a long moment before dialing. The ring barely lasted one cycle. "Boone." The voice was low and slow, like creek water over stones. Hi. This is Ethan Cooper, Raymond's son." A pause. Then a smile in the voice. "Well, I'll be. Little Ethan. You still got that cowlick?" Ethan blinked. "You, remember me?" "I remember your dad shot the head off a copperhead behind the courthouse and kept lecturing it for trespass." "What's going on?" Ethan swallowed. "It's about an HOA." Another pause. Then Boone's voice dropped into something heavier. "She's at it again. You know Cheryl?" "I know Clipboard Cheryl. Franklin County's most enthusiastic self-appointed bureaucrat." Boone sighed. "Tell Ray I still owe him that whiskey from '89. I'll see him next week." Ethan was still holding the phone when he noticed movement across the street. Cheryl stood near her porch, watching. When she realized she'd been seen, she turned abruptly and disappeared inside. The next morning, a crisp envelope was wedged in the screen door. Ethan opened it slowly, already expecting the tone. Final enforcement draft, HOA violation review pending, Monday, 6 p.m. Mandatory attendance required. Raymond came out behind him, coffee in hand, not even glancing at the envelope. "Boone's coming into town next week," he said casually. Ethan dropped his spoon into his soup, splashing broth across the table. That night, after the lights dimmed and Maple Lane grew still, Cheryl crept across the street in the glow of her porch light and pinned something to the Cooper's door. By morning, it was crisp and curled with dew. HOA board meeting mandatory, Monday 6 p.m. A long, boxy Lincoln rolls into town. The diner windows fog slightly as heads turn. Raymond simply nods. He's early. The car moved like it belonged there, slow, deliberate, humming low enough to sound like part of the road. It passed Maple Lane and turned onto Main, rolling past the grocery store and gas station, before easing to a stop in front of Betty's diner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out, straight back despite his age, wearing a light brown overcoat and a dark fedora tilted just so. Judge Franklin Boone adjusted his collar against the wind, tucked a worn paper folder beneath his arm, and strolled toward the diner entrance. Inside, conversations stilled mid-sentence. Coffee mugs were lowered to saucers. Boone's shoes clicked once on the step, then he paused, letting the moment land before walking in. Betty was the first to move, appearing from behind the counter with a grin. "Well, if it isn't the Honorable himself," she said. "Your usual." "Please," Boone replied, removing his hat with a gentle nod. "But tell the kitchen I'm ready to be impressed." The chalkboard had already been updated, Boone's return pie special, sweet but dangerous. At the far booth, Raymond raised his coffee slightly. Boone met his gaze, gave a two-finger salute, and made his way over. Ethan scooted to the side to let him in. Boone didn't say much at first. He just poured sugar into his cup, stirred it once, and sipped. Outside, the wind carried dry leaves across the sidewalk in hissing circles. "She's still at it," Raymond said finally. Boone nodded. "I saw the QR sign stapled to a tree." "Cute. I figured you'd want to see it for yourself." "She using HOA codes again?" "Codes, badges, decals, and now public shaming. Sent out a countywide email last night. Claims there's a board meeting this Friday." Boone raised an eyebrow. "Did she form a board?" "No." Boone reached into his folder, pulled out a sealed envelope, and slid it across the table. "Deliver it if she pushes further. County seals on it. If she ignores it, I'll make some calls." Ethan leaned forward. "What's in it?" "Formal cease and desist. Legal language she won't understand, but might pretend she does." Outside the diner, Cheryl rounded the corner. She was walking fast, shoulders squared, phone in hand. When she caught sight of the Lincoln, her pace slowed. Then she saw Boone through the glass, sitting across from Raymond. Her steps faltered. She stopped mid-stride, one foot still hovering over a crack in the sidewalk. Boone turned his head and looked directly at her. She froze. Boone chuckled once, quietly, and sipped his coffee. She backed away, phone still pressed to her cheek, and disappeared around the corner. An hour later, inboxes across Fallfield Springs pinged. The subject line read, "Emergency HOA Board Meeting, Mandatory Attendance Required." The body included a vague agenda, a stern warning about civic consequences for non-appearance, and a new term, Community Behavioral Review. Raymond didn't even open it. He just moved Boone's envelope to the hall table. That afternoon, Ethan headed into town to pick up mail and a sack of birdseed. Outside the post office, he spotted Cheryl in a tight standoff with Mrs. Eloise, who clutched her knit shawl like a shield. "It's not the cat, ma'am," Cheryl insisted. "It's the principle of unregulated meowing in a communal auditory space." "It's Tinkerbell," Eloise snapped. "She's 14. She's not starting a riot." Cheryl pointed toward a clipboard. "Repeated disturbances can." Ethan walked past them, tipping his cap lightly to Mrs. Eloise. Cheryl didn't acknowledge him. Her expression was pinched, hands white around the pen. By sundown, Boone and Deputy Glenn met behind the diner, leaning on a rusted patrol cruiser near the side alley. The sun threw long amber streaks across the cracked asphalt. "She's getting louder," Glenn said. "And she's dragging people in who just want to grill their chicken in peace." Boone opened his folder, scanned a page. "Get ready," he said. "This may need escalation through channels." That night, mailboxes along Maple Lane stood at attention like sentinels. Then, one by one, their flags flipped down. Cheryl had hand-delivered fines marked "Final Notice." The church hall smells like coffee and anxiety. Folding chairs line up like soldiers. Cheryl takes the stage with a manila folder and a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. The lights overhead were warmer than necessary, casting a yellow sheen over the polished floors and making the plastic tablecloths cling to their corners. A folding table near the entrance held a tray of banana bread slices wrapped in wax paper and a row of paper cups beside a thermos marked "Decaf." Mrs. Shaw adjusted her glasses and smoothed her cardigan as she passed out napkins. Ethan sat near the back, arms crossed loosely, beside his father. Raymond looked comfortable, as usual, hands resting on his knees, face unreadable. They both watched as residents filtered in, hesitant and quiet. Mr. Ramos chose a chair on the aisle. Mrs. Green came in whispering with Eloise, both holding coffee cups too tightly. At the front, Cheryl stood beneath a hand-painted sign that read, "Community Governance Forum, sponsored by Fallfield HOA." The acronym was bolded in red. She tapped her notes once on the podium and waited until the shuffling stopped. "You all know why we're here," she began. "Fallfield Springs is experiencing a breakdown. In civility. In structure. In respect." Ethan glanced at Raymond, who didn't move. "Tonight," Cheryl continued, "we will review ongoing violations, assess fines, and determine mandatory remedies." A low murmur passed through the crowd. She flipped open her folder. To begin, excessive porch light brightness at 432 Maple Lane. Non-uniform mailbox angle at 428. Improper use of lawn chimes and unauthorized flag display at 426. All eyes shifted to the Coopers. "And at 4:30, she said, voice tightening, unauthorized private internet installation, defiance of community bandwidth equity, and failure to comply with tech improvement fees." Raymond blinked slowly. Ethan inhaled. Cheryl looked pleased. "We have documented these violations. You may address the board." There was no board. Just chairs. Ethan's fingers curled around the envelope in his lap. His stomach twisted. Boone's words echoed, "You'll know when she overplays her hand." He stood slowly. The envelope crinkled as he held it up. "This is a letter signed by Judge Franklin Boone," he said. His voice didn't carry at first. Then he stepped forward. "It states, officially, that no HOA exists here. That Cheryl Knight is not authorized to act on behalf of any registered organization. And that continued representation will be considered impersonation of legal authority." He handed it to Cheryl. She didn't take it. "That's a scare tactic," she said. "Boone is Raymond's friend. This is all a setup. It's a personal vendetta." The room stirred. Mrs. Eloise stood up from her chair with more force than expected. "Then explain this," she said, holding up her phone. "You sent me a Venmo request for a fence violation. I don't even have a fence." Cheryl blinked. "That must have been." "And what about the meowing penalty?" Eloise added. "You billed me $10 for my cat." More residents shifted. Mr. Ramos stood. "What exactly does the community improvement fee go to?" he asked. "Because I sure haven't seen improvement." Cheryl's posture straightened, but her shoulders tensed. "You're staging a coup," she snapped, her voice rising above the murmurs. "Well then, let's take it to court." Raymond unlocks an old file box labeled, Cottonville 2018. Ethan raises an eyebrow. "That's not just a fishing town, is it?" The box sat beneath 2 stacks of newspaper bundles and a tangle of fishing lures, its corners dented, the masking tape label faded but legible. Raymond knelt without a word, sliding it out with a grunt. The den smelled of paper and pipe tobacco, even though neither had been lit in years. Outside, the fog clung low to the yard, curling under the porch and against the window panes like it was trying to listen in. Ethan took a slow sip from his coffee and leaned forward. "What happened in Cottonville?" Raymond didn't answer right away. He unlatched the lid and lifted a folder free. Its cover read, Community Integrity Watch, Incident Reports 2018. "She tried the same thing there," Raymond said. "Fake HOA, fine schedules, donation links, compliance inspections. Made off with 12 grand before anyone blinked." "People paid her?" Ethan asked. "They did," Raymond said. "Small town, a little fear goes a long way." They spread the contents across the desk, photocopied emails, screenshots of payment requests, photos of yard signs identical to the ones now appearing in Fallfield Springs. Cheryl's name appeared on nearly every form, sometimes as chair, other times as coordinator for order. Boone's voice came through clearly on speakerphone. "She's already been warned once," he said. "I told her if it happened again, she'd be looking at more than a slap on the wrist." "She's doubling down," Ethan said. "We got a new notice this morning, some nonsense about legal enforcement powers." Boone sighed. "Then it's time. Gather everything." Raymond slid a flash drive into the computer and began copying files, voice memos, PDFs, scans of mailbox notices and printed QR codes. His hands were steady, labeling folders by timestamp, color-coding the key ones. Every so often he'd mutter, cross-reference with Glenn's call log, or, "This matches her Cottonville speech, word for word." That afternoon, as Ethan raked leaves in the front yard and burned a neat pile near the sidewalk, Glenn pulled up in his cruiser. He stepped out holding a brown envelope and nodded once. Ethan met him at the gate. "It's all in here," he said, handing over the flash drive. "Every file. Every voice memo. Every flyer." Glenn took it, weighed it in his palm. "She's going to hate this." "She already does." Meanwhile, across the street, Cheryl hammered a new wooden sign into her lawn. It read in bold red letters, "Authorized Compliance Zone." Beneath it, a smaller print warned, "Non-compliance subject to citation and review." That evening, just before the porch lights turned on, Ethan spotted movement in the dark. Cheryl stood on the edge of her property, arms folded, eyes locked on their front door. Her voice barely carried across the street, but he heard it clear enough. "You don't scare me." A court-sealed envelope arrives at Cheryl Knight's door. Red stamp. County seal. She opens it and nearly drops her mug. The paper trembled in her hands, though her jaw stayed tight. She read the first line twice. Then a third time. Outside, wind rustled the flag she'd mounted at a regulation angle, the pole clinking softly against its bracket. The mug she'd been holding, white ceramic with HOA leader, in gold, slipped slightly in her grip. She caught it just before it hit the porch rail. Cheryl Knight had been many things in Fallfield Springs. Determined. Organized. Occasionally loud. But until now, she'd never been officially recognized by anything that bore a seal not printed from her home computer. She didn't say a word. But neighbors noticed her curtains stayed shut the rest of Friday. Saturday came bright and crisp. The community hall smelled faintly of lemon-scented polish and folding chairs left too long in closets. A sign near the door read, "Fallfield Springs Community Oversight Forum, attendance required." The word "required" had been underlined twice in red marker. Inside, rows of chairs stood in clean lines. Some bore name tags, Compliance Support Volunteer, Deputy Committee Chair. No one seemed to know who those roles belonged to. Ethan and Raymond arrived quietly, nodding to familiar faces. Mr. Ramos offered a curt wave. Mrs. Green clutched a thermos. Eloise wore her church pearls. Cheryl entered through the side door, holding a manila folder like it contained nuclear codes. Her hair was pinned tighter than usual. Her expression was brittle confidence. Behind her, a homemade banner hung from the wall, HOA Oversight Meeting, a time for order. She took the center podium. "Let's begin," she said, voice pitched a touch too high. "This is not a trial, but a structured hearing." A cough from the back. Someone whispered, "Sure sounds like one." Cheryl pressed on. "Our community has endured behavior unbecoming of a harmonious neighborhood. Violations. Insolence. Evasion of voluntary fees." She flipped open her folder, pulled out sheets, and began reading. Household 430, failure to comply with porch light dimming ordinance, unauthorized mailbox reinforcement, and refusal to submit bandwidth credentials. Raymond didn't flinch. Ethan leaned forward, reaching into his coat. Before Cheryl could continue, the door at the back creaked open. All heads turned. Judge Franklin Boone stepped inside, his hat in one hand, the other tucked into a pocket of his overcoat. He nodded once toward Raymond, who returned it without moving. Cheryl's mouth paused mid-sentence. Her eyes darted from Boone to her papers. Then back. Boone said nothing. He walked to a seat in the last row and sat. No introductions. No fanfare. Ethan stood. He walked to the front, pulled out a small speaker, and pressed play. Cheryl's voice filled the room. "Creative compliance fees keep people in line. They don't ask if it's real if you sound confident." A hush fell. Then murmurs. Ramos leaned forward. Eloise clutched her pearls tighter. Boone rose. He opened a leather folder and read without drama. In 2018, in Cottonville County, Cheryl Knight operated under a falsified HOA entity. She collected over $12,000 in community dues, distributed fraudulent citations, and impersonated county authority. She was given a formal warning and barred from initiating any such organization without registration and oversight. Cheryl's face lost color. Boone closed the folder. "Ms. Knight, as of now, you are legally barred from representing any community governance entity within this county." Gasps. Voices. Mrs. Green stood. "I want my money back." Ramos raised his hand. "So where did our tech fee go?" Someone shouted, "She threatened to confiscate my grill." Cheryl's folder slipped from her hands. She backed toward the door. "You're all blind. You don't see the chaos without structure. I am the HOA." "No, ma'am," Boone said calmly. "You're just a neighbor." She turned and fled. Her binder hit the floor with a slap. Pages scattered in every direction. The room was quiet except for the rustling of loose paper. At the foot of the podium, her clipboard lay cracked, its once shiny surface split down the middle. Raymond bent down, picked it up, and handed it to Ethan. "File it," he said. A month later. Thanksgiving has passed. Snow threatens. Ethan visits the porch, finds his father reading the paper, and a new letter on the table. The porch was dressed for December now. Pine garlands hung from the railing, and red and green bulbs blinked steadily along the eaves. The sky was a dull silver, thick with the promise of snow that hadn't yet begun to fall. A faint scent of cinnamon drifted from Mrs. Green's kitchen across the street, riding the wind with the sound of a far-off radio playing Bing Crosby. Ethan stepped onto the porch with a thermos in one hand and a scarf only half-tied. Moose let out a snort but didn't lift his head from his spot near the heater vent. Raymond sat with one leg propped over the other, newspaper folded neatly across his knee. His mug sat on the table, close to a single white envelope with no name, no stamp, no return address. "Morning," Ethan said. Raymond didn't look up. "Still early enough." Ethan set down the thermos and reached for the envelope. "This just come?" Raymond nodded once. "Left right on the mat." They didn't open it right away. Instead, Ethan sat beside him, listening to the wind chime they'd hung the day before, swaying above their heads. It had been a gift from Ramos and Green, something about reclaiming airspace. The wind carried the sharp edge of frost, but it wasn't bitter. Just enough to remind you winter was near. I keep thinking about Thanksgiving, Ethan said. Raymond's paper rustled as he turned a page. The folding tables. The pies. Ramos's chair breaking in the middle of Grace. Ethan laughed. He didn't drop the plate though. They never do, Raymond said, voice low and warm. They had hosted the whole block. Mrs. Shaw brought cornbread stuffing. Eloise made something green and mysterious. Boone had sent a bottle of something strong with a note that read, "Save this for the next emergency." The laughter had lasted long after the sun went down, fire pits glowing like beacons between leaf piles and porch steps. Now, the street felt whole again. Neighbors waved without hesitation. Decorations reappeared on lawns. Cheryl's signs had been torn down, her fines forgotten, though not forgiven. Ethan picked up the envelope and opened it. A single line in neat handwriting. "Enjoy your quiet, while it lasts." He stared at it a moment longer than necessary before handing it to his father. Raymond read it once. His mouth twitched. Then he stood without comment, walked to the fire pit near the porch steps, struck a match from the tin he kept in his coat, and lit the corner of the page. The flame crawled quickly, curling the edges, the ink smearing just before it turned to ash. Raymond watched until nothing was left but black flakes drifting into the breeze. "She never learned," he said softly. Across the street, Cheryl's house sat quiet. No cars. No lights. Just a sagging wreath on the door and drapes drawn tight. But as Ethan turned back toward the porch, something caught his eye. A flicker. A shift. One curtain, just slightly, moved. He narrowed his eyes. "You see that?" he asked. Raymond followed his gaze, took a long sip from his mug, white ceramic, chipped near the handle, words faded but still legible, retired, but still watching. He didn't answer at first. Then, finally, round two. Ethan smiled faintly. "Could be." Raymond just nodded, eyes steady. The wind picked up, and the chimes began to sing. On a porch brushed with pine scent and wind chimes, quiet returned to Fallfield Springs, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. It carried with it the memory of neighbors rising together, of truth outlasting imitation, and of calm hands holding firm when rules turned to chains. Sometimes, power hides behind clipboards and printed seals, but real authority lives in shared coffee, steady voices, and the courage to say, "Enough." When we stand together, even the loudest bullies must fall silent. So if the porch across your street ever grows too loud with false authority, maybe it's time to step outside, nod to your neighbor, and stand a little taller.